Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to room 1010. This is a special joint meeting between the Economic Development Committee and the Comprehensive Job Creation Plan Committee. I'm joined in the Economic Development Committee by my colleague Monica Rodriguez, and our Ad hoc Committee on Job Creation and Plan, chaired by Councilman Krikorian, along with Bob Blumenfeld is here. I guess that's just so we'll take comment. Are there any? What are we doing? Okay, we've got some public comment on multiple comments. Okay, Antonia, first up, followed by Wayne.
Thank you very much. And number one, ladies and gentlemen, we all want a healthy, thriving workforce that will provide adequate, wonderful jobs, economic development incentives. And the problem with that is that people are just not educated well enough anymore. Most people are too fucking junkied out. We've got a drug problem that we're not addressing. Most students already now are already on drugs that they can't perform either in school or in the workforce. We got to tackle the problem of drugs and opiates. The drug dealers are already in all neighborhoods. You've got junkies, gangbangers, wetbacks, niggers, and white trash, and the homos on every block attacking and basically coercing the children. Get those drug addicts off the streets, stop the drug inflow, and please let's produce better quality children who will buckle their butts, learn, and become productive adults. We've got to do something about the drug menacing problem. Number two, youth. They're not youth, they're drug addicts and gangbangers and criminal motherfuckers. Get those children and spank their motherfucking asses. Spank them. And deport those that do not belong here because we can't sustain them. And then put those youth in their proper place. That's spank their butts and train them how to be good, productive children and citizens. And ladies and gentlemen, let's see. Number five, ladies and gentlemen, City Clerk Carol Richards, one of the greatest ever, exemplary female. She's leaving or retiring on March 13th. Carol Richards, I've known you for years, and you are a doll. You're an Asian, beautiful lady who's always been so gracious to all of us. May you truly, you and your family, be healthy, happy, successful, rich, and all that and more. I wish you nothing but the beauty of life. And number, I will consolidate all that. Well, there goes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. God bless America and Donald Trump.
So we're here today, trying to get my nonprofit off the ground, Transportation Niggers, a 501c4. Very difficult. Trying my best to do business in this city, but the problem is I've run out of money to pay off the building inspectors. I need a grant so that I can pay off the building inspectors. I gotta keep paying off city employees because goddamn fucking FBI ran by a bunch of niggers and Jews, bunch of motherfuckers and faggots. They can't get in here and straighten this shit out, so I gotta pay to play. And the only thing I can do is come here to the Economic Development Committee and ask for more Benjamins to give to more of your city staff that we gotta pay off. Now, we got a lot of people to pay off here today. We got to pay off the Jedi Zone. We got to pay off the Building and Safety Department. We got to pay off, what? Look at this list of guys. I got to pay off the city attorney. I got to pay off the fire department for inspections. I got to pay off the sanitation department. I got to pay off street services. I got to keep paying off all these motherfuckers, and I just don't have any more goddamn money in the goddamn account. So I'm just asking for a grant so that I can keep paying off more of these people so I can keep my fucking doors open. Because, see, I make little puppets. They look like Herb Wesson, tiny little nigger mouse with little cigarettes, and they're called lawn jockeys. And I make little tiny city lawn jockeys, and they're a bunch of little fucks like you people, little assholes like Paul Kerkorian that gets in there in the city council meeting and he goes, and I go, well, I don't understand. What are you saying? He keeps talking Armenian. And I don't understand. I can't understand what you're saying. I know. But if you speak English, I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. I just don't understand what you're saying. I just don't know. I don't understand. It's just a dumb motherfucker who don't understand shit. I just don't try to understand.
Please ask Mr. Spindler to exit expeditiously from the room so we can do the committee's business.
Okay, Mr. Sachs, followed by Mr. Previn. Mr. Sachs, followed by Mr. Previn.
You've been excluded, Spindler. You're on your way out. I am chairing this meeting. Get out. Get out. We're not debating. Get out.
We are
We're
united.
not debating. Get out. Please remove Mr. Spindler immediately. I just did. I'm co-chairing this meeting. Get out. Remove Mr. Spindler right now.
That isn't the fucking way it works. He's chairing the fucking meeting.
Get out.
He doesn't fucking chair the fucking meeting. He chaired the motherfucking meeting.
You're being disruptive. You're being very
Get
disruptive,
out.
sir.
Then why the fuck did he throw me out? Why the fuck did he
Mr.
throw me out?
Sachs.
Yes, sir. Can I ask
Mr.
for
Sachs,
clarification?
Mr. Sachs,
Yes,
there is
thank
no
you.
general public comment in this meeting. Stick to the agenda and speak to the items that are on our
Okay,
committee.
so there's no general public comment. That's what I was going to ask.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Arnold Sachs. So this is a special meeting of the Economic Development and Joint Consideration and Ad hoc Committee Comprehensive Job Creation Plan. But you have a Housing and Community Investment Department that's not meeting as part of this. You have an Economic Workforce Development Department that's not meeting as part of this. So how do you invest in the community? Well, better zoning, better planning, affordable housing, and jobs. What are you doing to create jobs? By the way, on this item and agenda, there is no community impact statements on any of the items on this agenda. And since we're only doing the first two, we'll be considering the other 9 later on in this meeting and have a chance to speak on those. You're nodding your head yes. So you have an incentive development program, but immigration has an incentive program also. And their incentive program is that if you come to the country as an immigrant and you invest $1 million or so in creating jobs, then you go right to the head of the class and get a green card and get citizenship. And I don't know about the people you put to work. That needs to be addressed somehow or somewhat. Because a lot of people that come to the country now, yes, there are poor people, but there's a lot of wealthy people that are leaving places in the world that are under a lot of duress. So they come to America and they bring their $1 million because they're getting away from the bad situation that, I don't know, in some countries, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia. They come here and they're immediately given immigration free pass. So there's a disconnect between the two. And then when they come in and bring in their citizens, which is fine to a certain degree, then they take over service jobs in America.
Thank you. Time
That
is
needs
up.
to be addressed by the city council.
Thank you. Mr. Previn.
Thank you, and what a marvelous opportunity to have a joint session among these two great committees. It's a little bit of a puzzle as to why we're having a special ram it through session, but I took a moment to look at item 1 and 2. Item 2, they didn't put out the document, so that must be the one that's interesting, but you know, it has to do with incentives for if you use businesses that employ foster youth get a kind of business preference for city contracts. I'd like to hear more about that if there's a presentation. And regarding the first item, which I did look at more closely, it appears that they're making some money available. Now, it's clear that EWDD has been advised by planning and business building and safety that they're unable to favor Jedi Zone projects by expediting their permits. But, this is the good news, we can engage expediters. Now, expediter is a fancy word for lobbyist, or, you know, they come in and they handle all the city business that's confusing for applicants. Now, in this case, that sounds fantastic. It's just that we're going to have to engage them, evidently. And EWDBD states that the work is intermittent in nature, that they don't have the staff to do this. But when I looked at it's just a little bit confusing about how this is going to, you know, move the needle. It's $2.5 million. I was hoping that there'd be a presentation before you called us up so we could hear about how this is going to benefit not just the city insiders who always get, you know, the benefit of these projects, but how it's going to impact our communities in a meaningful way. I haven't been able to detect that, but I am certain that you are all working in that direction. And I just would ask in my last 10 seconds, why is it that there's no general public comment when it's on the kiosk and it makes it seem like you could sign up for it? That is a bit misleading. And I would also concur that it is the chair of the meetings that speaks, not those who sit next to the chair. So that's my comment. Are you not going to?
Thank you for your comments.
Are you denying general public?
McAllister.
Yeah.
Pat McAllister.
Thank you. I like to speak on 1 and 2, and then when we get to the other items, I'd like to speak after the chief legislative analysts speak, because I want to know what they have to say, and then I can comment. But anyway, I've been getting information. I want breakdowns by race and ethnicity, because I'm interested in my people, African Americans, and we have a new name, Foundational Black Americans, because we built the foundation of this nation. Now, why you guys are bringing in all these African descendants from Africa and all these other black people from around the world, and you're bringing them here and you're categorizing them as African Americans. So therefore, our numbers, I'm a child from the slave trade. Our black members, foundational black members, we get buried. For instance, Skid Row is 100% African American. You're not going to find any Africans and Jamaicans and all of them down there. They're getting the housing and the job, and you're categorizing them as African American. And you can't do that. I just got some information from one of the agencies. They got us categorized under African American / black. So that means everybody, all these foreigners who are of African descent, you're throwing them in with us. So we're changing our name, first of all, and I'm going to contact President Trump, somebody in Washington, to give us foundational black Americans, okay? That way we don't lose everything. Now, number 2, this here I don't particularly like. You're going to give business preferences to companies who employ foster youth. Well, as you know, maybe 300,000 African American, foundational black Americans are in foster care, because you threw our black men and women parents in prison for nothing. Many are innocent on plea bargains, and so our children are in foster care. Now, I'm going to do some statistics on this to see how many illegal aliens, Hispanic, Latinos, Filipinos, and Asians are getting this money. I can bet very few are foundational black Americans. Thank you.
Okay, that will conclude public comment. And without objection, member, we're going to move items 2, 4 through 9 on consent. Okay? And as Mr. Marquise Harris Dawson joins us, we're going to turn this portion of the meeting over to my colleague, Paul Krikorian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go ahead and call up item number 1, please.
Item number 1 are reports from the city legislative analyst, the city administrative officer, economic and workforce development department, relative to the Jedi Zone program, and this has also been referred to the Budget and Finance Committee.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Daisy Hernandez with the Economic and Workforce Development Department. Jackie Rodriguez, also with Economic and Workforce Development Department.
I'm Clay McCarter, CLA.
So glad to be back. Back in August last year, the Economic and Workforce Development Department presented to you, brought forth a report with the proposed Jobs and Economic Development Incentives Program, JEDI program, that is for a proposed establishment policy and an incentive plan for businesses in the JEDI areas. Now, the committee made recommendations to approve the proposed policy and incentive plan, but also instructed the city administrator's office to do a report back and for the potential impacts of the program, including potential funding for the program. So in October last year, 2019, the city administrator, the CAO report made recommendations for EWDD to come back and do a report addressing making some recommendations for EWDD to work with the different city departments, including city planning, building and safety, and to have specific processes on how one of the incentives for the JEDI program would work. And this is for the fee reduction for permits through planning and building and safety. They also wanted to know, they made recommendations for us to provide information on the impact on the delivery of this, of the systems in the city and the potential of using existing services to expedite the development permit process. Also, another recommendation was for EWDD to work with various city departments to coordinate the implementation of the proposed compliance assistance program. And lastly, EWDD was directed to complete the Charter Section 1022 review to comply with the 1022 requirements. Also, another recommendation from the CAO was for this chief legislative analyst to work to identify potential funding sources for the program. So today, before you, we are presenting the recommendations or report back on the recommendations made by the CAO.
Yes, the CLA's office has located over $2.5 million in available funding from the Subordinate Loan Fund to support both the JEDI Zone Program and the Economic Development Trust Fund. The Subordinate Loan Fund was established in 1997 to provide gap financing to small and medium-sized businesses who received industrial development bonds from the city's Industrial Development Authority. Subordinate loans can be used for costs of bond issuance, costs of land, building, and equipment, working capital necessary for startup costs, training costs, and relocation costs. For a variety of reasons, including low interest rates, slower financing timelines, and aversions to submitting company records to a public review process, no industrial development bonds, and therefore no subordinate loans have been issued in the last 10 years. We recommend that the subordinate loan revolving fund be closed and the remaining balance transferred to the Economic Development Trust Fund, which has a current balance of $80,000. Of the over $2.5 million to be transferred, $1.5 would be reserved for the JEDI Zone program, and the remaining balance would be used for the Economic Development Trust Fund projects. Should there be any future industrial development bonds, the EDTF will be able to make subordinate loans. And then, so rather than having the funds sit unused for a long period of time, they will be made available for more flexible range of uses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For EWDD, we actually went back and continued working with city planning and building and safety to establish a better process on how the fee reduction permit process would work. It was determined that we would have to make a transfer of funds upon approval, of course, so that UDAG money being transferred to for the purposes of this program, we can then transfer the money that would be used for the subsidy for the permit fees for both planning and building and safety. Based on our conversations and the assessment that we made, it was determined that most of the permit fee reductions would probably be used, will likely be used by building and safety by about 70% and 30% for planning. So that's the recommendation we're making, that of the funding, if approved, 70% of the funding be transferred to building and safety and then 30% to planning. As far as the impact on the city departments and the way that the delivery systems, of course, this is a new program. We anticipate that there's going to be a lot of interest, and there will definitely be an impact. As we went through the 1022 process, it was determined that there's staff in the city that can do the work. However, there's not enough staff to carry out and implement the program. So that's why the recommendation for the expediters was presented. At this time, I'm glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you very much. And let me first thank all of you and everyone at EWDD and CLA's office and the CAO's office and the other departments that have worked on this. This has been a long time coming. It's been a very long time coming since we first started discussing this in the ad hoc committee. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and the Economic Development Committee as well for working collaboratively with the ad hoc committee to get this done. Right now the city is enjoying record-breaking foreign direct investment. The LAX is breaking all records. The port is breaking all records, and the economy is really booming at the top level. But we all know that benefit hasn't trickled down to every neighborhood in Los Angeles, and there are small businesses that are struggling throughout Los Angeles, and there are communities that are not well served by that economic surge. And so what the Jedi Zones give us is an opportunity to help lift up all boats with that rising tide and ensure that communities that are not currently being well served have a better opportunity to attract investment, create new jobs, hire people locally who can take those jobs. And so this has been a heavy lift, and you all have really worked hard to create something out of whole cloth. After redevelopment went away, many of us wished that there were tools that we could use to prime the pump and continue to encourage economic development, and we're not left with a lot of tools. And this is a big step forward in giving us all that opportunity. So I really do want to thank you very much for your great work. Members, any comments or questions?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, for your leadership in this issue. I know it's something that the ad hoc committee has been focusing on for a great part of a year. My question, just kind of basics, upon approval of the recommendations, what are the next steps? How soon can we expect to see some movement?
Okay. So upon approval of our policy and the recommendations made, we can start implementing the program right away, although we are actually gearing up, getting ready, getting the proper systems in place so we can implement this right away.
So is there an effort to advise the council offices of this tool and how they can utilize it, or what's the informational process going to be?
There will be, good afternoon. There will be a council meeting, not a council meeting, I'm sorry, a meeting with all of the council deputies to kind of explain the rollout and explain what the process, procedures, et cetera, that's forthcoming. We don't have a date yet. We don't have approval yet. So we will be working with the council offices to go forward.
Well, thank you. Good luck. Good work and good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Krikorian, for this. I know, again, I think each of us represents parts of the city that would definitely benefit from this type of incentive program and this kind of assistance, particularly for those of us that have been left vulnerable along our business corridors because of the likes of organizations like VEDC that failed on our watch, unfortunately, and as a result really abandoned a lot of, turns out they didn't do the work that they proclaimed that they were doing. And so left a huge void to begin with because they never fulfilled the actual intent of the work that they were supposed to do. That said, having had those lessons learned, you can appreciate my concern for making sure that we have solid metrics on how we are evaluating the way these dollars are being distributed, what's our timelines for meeting those goals, because I think so often we adopt programs and we're enthusiastic about the work that they are proposed to achieve, but I want to see it on the ground. And, that was one of the challenges and frustrations that I had with VEDC. I kept hearing all about all of the great work that they were doing, but I never really saw it at the street level. And so I want to make sure that upon the adoption of the areas that will be approved for JEDI zones, how we measure the effectiveness of this tool, how many businesses or how many, what's our impact, what's our measured impact as a result of that. The other thing I want to say is, and I have a question just because we talked, I know in the last committee when I talked about the bandwidth and the work as it related to the food program, the Good Food Zone. And we were talking about the business response unit or resource unit and what their scope was and how it related to as we onboarded another consultant to help supplement the work or a staff member to supplement the work and kind of handhold those businesses to participate in that. In the same vein, we're having that conversation with regards to these expediters. And so again, I want to make sure that we're not being duplicative in terms of our ability to really have that reach in those communities and what does that expediter really look like on the ground in terms of helping to facilitate, because I've said this to you all before, we have the HOV lane for expediting, and yet we've onboarded so many people on that green, we've given so many green stickers that it's not much faster when it comes to planning, when it comes to building and safety. And so what does that look like in terms of the expediter's role in actually accelerating getting these folks through the process, given the current timelines of even expedited permitting, whether it's for planning or building and safety? What does that timeline now look like?
Okay, so for the expediter services, what it is just assisting the businesses to go through the process, getting the paperwork in line. A lot of times they have to go back and forth. They go to the counter and they say, well, this is not complete. And this is just providing that assistance to get them ready to get the permit. So they still have to go through the line to get the permit itself. It's just getting permit ready. That's the difference.
Okay, so it's more of it's not quite expediter, but more so of a, advisor, guy, whatever you want to call it.
Expediter is the lingo that's used by building and safety and planning. So, Got it. But it is to get
case manager.
It's more to get them permit ready, basically, and instead of them having to go back and forth every time they visit our department.
Be their CPA if they were doing their taxes, essentially, right? Preparing all the documents to make sure that they're going to, we won't have any problems with the IRS.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, as far as keeping metrics, yes, as part of our original report, the one that was presented in August, we recommended that we do measure the impact. We're recommending a 5-year JEDI zone establishment. So it would be established for 5 years, and we'd definitely be keeping track and reporting back on the specific achievements, and then making recommendations on whether the areas need to, the JEDI zone designation needs to be expanded, or if we've completed what our goals. So we do have metrics specified.
So like, for example, much like when we talked about the food zone, it was disclosed that the individual that would be retained with the dollars that were allocated for that, that advisor, we'll call them, that they could only manage 10 businesses. Per expediter, what are we expecting their caseload to look like, depending on how many JEDI zones are adopted? What would be their expected capacity?
For the expediters?
Right.
Well, it depends on whether the businesses even need that service at the time. So it's really hard to tell. We would have to, the idea is to have a bench of different expediters. So depending on the needs of the program, the needs of the businesses, we'd have to select the expediter to provide the service as needed.
Okay.
So.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bloomfield?
Great, thank you. And I share my colleagues' appreciation that we're finally getting to this stage. We've been talking about it for a while, and it's great. We need to do everything we can to try to
promote these areas and figure out ways to create economic benefits. The expediter thing is interesting, and I hope we get to the point where we never need an expediter. So in some ways, I want us to work to get to a place where that's not a valuable asset, because really, if there's a problem for small businesses that they need an expediter, we need to look at our systems and try to figure out how do we make those systems better so that nobody needs an expediter. But reality is what it is, and we can keep working on that issue and recognize that this is an area where, at the moment, we can add value to folks, and so let's go ahead and do that. So I appreciate that. I know that part of what we're doing is trying to look at the criteria to find objective characteristics to identify where the areas of true need are, and I think that what you've done makes a lot of sense. I did want to modify the number 8. I think it's inadvertently omits a little bit of areas of need. Specifically, the area, number 8 mentions times remaining on a community redevelopment plan area as one of the many criteria. But for the unfortunate CRA plan areas that were dissolved post the dissolution of the CRAs, they were dissolved not because they wouldn't have been renewed in normal order. They would have been. But because the CRAs committed suicide, they no longer existed, and therefore they were not able to get renewed. But the need is still very much the same. And this affects one of the CRA areas in my district. I think it would have a limited impact, but it does affect some. So I'm going to suggest that we modify that briefly, or not briefly, but in a small way, so that it reads instead, within the boundary of a community redevelopment area that was active at the time of the dissolution of the CRAs, as opposed to just the more arbitrary of that there's time remaining. And I know I've talked with you all about it, and it's my understanding that makes sense with you all. I just wanted to confirm that with you so my colleagues understand that as well. And,
Yes, that is a great idea. So I think definitely would work.
Great. Well, thank you. So when it's appropriate time, I'd like to formally add that as an amendment.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else, members? Okay. I would like to propose a few recommendations for the committee's consideration. First, I'd ask that we approve the proposed Jobs and Economic Development Incentive Zones Establishment Policy and Incentive Plan as presented in Attachment 3 of EWDD's transmittal dated August 21st, 2019. 2, that we amend the EWDD report dated August 21st, 2019 at page 11 as follows. A, amend the EWDD report regarding secondary eligibility criteria. Amend criteria B to read a non-seasonal unemployment rate that is at least 3% higher than the citywide rate. And amend criteria C to read crime rates 5% higher than the citywide crime rate. Third, I'd ask that we adopt the CLA report dated January 16th, 2020. Fourth, I'd ask that we adopt the February 21st, 2020 EWDD report as amended to amend Recommendation 1 to transfer the entire balance from UDAG Revenue Fund number 356 into the Economic Development Trust Fund number 62L and appropriate as follows. $1.5 million to the Jedi Zone program and the remainder in economic development projects. And then, in addition, I'd ask that we amend that February 21st, 2020 EWDD report to delete recommendations 3 through 5 and instruct the Department of Building and Safety to incorporate Jedi zones into the existing Restaurant and Small Business Express program and report back to Council with a request for any additional resources if necessary after 6 months of Jedi Zone implementation. And so with those recommendations and as amended by Mr. Blumenfield's suggestion, that would be my proposal for approval by the two committees. Is there any objection? All right, so if there's no objection by The Jobs Committee, that will be the recommendation of the Jobs Committee, and I see no objection from the Economic Development Committee. So, Mr. Chairman, I gather that is your recommendation as well. All right.
I'm sorry.
Thank you all very much.
Mr. Chair, we just need a clarification. When we presented the report to you back in August, there was also a recommended revision that when the city council offices request a JEDI zone, that it be introduced by motion,
Right.
rather than, so is that going to be incorporated into the changes?
I thought that it already was. So if
Okay.
it wasn't, that was the intention that
Okay.
that it be initiated by motion.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Thank you again
Thank you.
very much for your hard work on this. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. The Jobs Committee will take its leave from you and leave you to your business.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to do business with you, and we shall continue on. Okay, we, as mentioned before, moved items 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 on consent. And the next item, Mr. Clerk.
That would be item number 3, and prior to item number 3, I would like to state for the record that for number 4, we are approving the CAO report that's dated 2/24, and the recommendations found within. For item number 3, we have a joint report from the Economic and Workforce Development Department and Workforce Development Board and a CAO report relative to program year 2019-20 Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act carry-in report.
Okay, can we get CAO and EWDD up? Please, Mrs. McAllister. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Shafi Amir from the CAO's office, and I'm here with EWDD.
Hi, I'm Gerardo Rubalcaba with EWDD.
The CAO report before you on this item recommends approval of EWDD's program year 2019-20 Workforce Development Board Annual Plan Carry-In Report and related requests in EWDD's transmittal. The CAO report also includes recommendations to approve additional actions which were not included in EWDD's transmittal, but which EWDD requested after they released their transmittal. An approval of the recommendations in the CAO report would authorize modifications to the 2019-20 program year, the current year, Workforce Development Board Annual Plan, which was approved in June 2019 by the Council and Mayor. The modifications to the annual plan include a reduction of EWDD's current year revenue budget for WIOA grant-related costs. Additionally, the recommendations authorize EWDD to expend general fund funding for the day labor centers, Cash for College, Hire LA, Summer Youth Employment Program, and LA Rise, or the LA Regional Initiative for Social Enterprise. These are funds that were left over from the previous fiscal year, general fund funding, which EWDD is requesting authority to expend in the current year for the same programs. EWDD also requests authority to accept reimbursements from the Social Security Administration for a program, funds from the Mayor's Fund for participants in the Los Angeles College Promise Program, and to confirm additional contract amendments with replacement operators of city workforce development sites formerly operated by the Youth Policy Institute. Those are just some additional contracts that were executed from the last council action approving the previous contract amendments. EWDD's carrying report states that funding for the 19-20 Workforce Development Board program year is about $1.99 million more than what was anticipated in the 19-20 annual plan approved back in June. The net increase is due to the second installment of a federal national dislocated worker grant, which is restricted to activities assisting those impacted by the 2018 Woolsey fire. And EWDD states that its 2019-20 overhead administrative costs for the WIOA grant, which is the primary workforce formula grant, will exceed the maximum allowed by the grantor, which is no more than 10% of the grant. Overhead costs include employee salaries, non-labor expenses, and related costs, which are city employee benefits and support services from other city departments. EWDD has chosen to reduce its reimbursements to the city for the WIOA-related costs. This involves reducing their WIOA reimbursements to the general fund from approximately $3.8 million, which was adopted in the current year budget, down to $2.3 million, which is about a $1.4 million decrease. EWDD's actions will reduce city revenue available for services in the current year by $1.4 million. EWDD's administrative costs have exceeded the WIOA grant cap since at least program year 2015-16. Our office will work with EWDD to identify potential general fund savings in their budget at the end of the current fiscal year to mitigate the impact of this reduction. And that concludes my remarks. If you have further questions, we can take them.
Okay. When does EWDD anticipate releasing its report on the 2021 annual plan?
I'm sorry, which report?
The annual report.
Oh, for the next program year, I think.
Yeah, so based on our current timeline, we expect to secure Workforce Development Board approval in May and have our transmittal released to City Council by the beginning of June.
There's always a lot of interest in our summer youth employment program. Any thoughts currently how those jobs are going to be distributed for this upcoming summer?
Sure, yeah, and for the upcoming summer, we are projecting level funding for our various funding sources. So in the current year, we had close to $13 million available in funding for subsidized positions. So, and we typically.
How many positions did that cover? Any idea?
It's in excess of 6,000 subsidized positions between city and county funded grants. But we allocate those positions by formula, so we do use poverty rate, to allocate summer youth positions to various parts of the city.
Through nonprofit organizations.
Exactly. So we have a network of service providers that we use to provide work experience. So we do use our 14 city youth source centers as the primary service providers, but we also augment that with an additional something like close to 10 service providers that also participate in the program.
Page 4 of the report states 3 additional contract amendments with the replacement operators of the Central LA/Pico Union Youth Source Center and the North Valley Source Centers were fully executed. Can you just sort of summarize what that means? And I know you mentioned it earlier.
Sure, yeah. With
just clarify what happened in those situations.
Yeah, sure. With the closure of Youth Policy Institute, they were our service provider for 4 different programs. So they did operate 2 youth source centers, one in North Valley, one in Central LA. They operated a work source center, and they also operated 2 day labor sites. Because of these programs are funded with different funding sources with different requirements, that there's a total of 10 different contracts, that were awarded to those, 4 programs. So when they did close down, we have been executing contract amendments, and we've identified our replacement operators, but we've required to amend contracts to allocate those funds. So I think that the 3 contracts that were referenced in this report are contracts that have been executed since our last update that was provided to this committee about a month ago.
So they're in place now.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
And by now, all 10 contracts have been executed.
Okay. Any questions? Ms. Rodriguez.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question because it was an issue that was brought to my attention regarding the payments to those employed with the Summer Youth Employment Program. What is an expected turnaround time for these youth to be paid and to get their paycheck? Because I believe it's been several months for some that I've discovered, and so I want to know what the expected time frame is for that payment. Also, what the auditing has been of those contracted to provide summer youth employment, which those agencies that are managing the payroll and the sign-in sheets and all of that. Because again, I think it puts a bad face on the city when we have contracted agencies that aren't fulfilling their responsibility and our youth are suffering for it. These are already a vulnerable population, and I need to make sure that we are working with individuals that are executing in good faith and effort for the youth of our city.
Absolutely, and that is a major concern for our department as well. So with YPI in particular, the issue that we faced was that once they shut down, we lost access to a number of the records that we would use to verify employment. So things like job site agreement, employee payrolls, and because we have not had access to those documents, we've worked with our replacement operators to identify or come up with alternate solutions to providing or to create the documentation that we need. So we have provided instruction to both AYE and El Proyecto, which operate the two youth source centers. They are now in the process of issuing payments to all of the summer youth providers that were impacted by the summer youth participants that were impacted by the YPI closure.
Well, these weren't necessarily impacted by YPI. These are some other agencies that were brought to my attention. So I just, for the purposes of, especially of these youth and for additional allocations, I think summer youth employment is a really great program, particularly for a vulnerable population in our community. But it doesn't help address the concerns if they're not getting their paycheck on time. And so I need to make sure, and that we're going to be following up on that. But it's a concern that was brought to my attention, and it was actually not related to YPI. So what has been the process of following up on those agencies, and what is a customary turnaround time for a check to be issued to these youth that are participating in the program?
Well, in terms of customary, timeline, I mean, our nonprofits do typically turn around fairly quickly, as long as
Very quickly a month, very quickly 5 months.
No, it should be within weeks of receiving the necessary documentation. We do monitor our contractors.
Do we explicitly in our contract direct these providers with what our expectation is for them to turn around those payments? Do we explicitly say, you have to pay these youth out once you know that they've done 40 hours, that they're going to get their check within 15 days? Mm-hmm. Is there an explicit item in their contract that directs them to do that?
What our contract stipulates is once we've issued payment to the contractor, to the service provider, they're required to issue payment. I believe it's within 10 days of receiving payment from the departments. Because sometimes, where sometimes we face delays is in the department issuing payment, because we have to go to our contractor or our grantees to secure payment. So for example, if the county, if a participant is funded through a county program, once we request funding, it takes time for them to issue payment to us, and then for that payment to be issued to the service provider.
Okay, so because the source of funds can be from the county, or they could be from a variety of sources,
Exactly.
There's no one singular way for us to...
Exactly.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would just say that this is why I'm even talking about youth development to begin with, because that's a whole lot of nonsense in terms of a very discombobulated process. So it's okay. But anyways, it demonstrates how ineffective this process is, and I think, and how it is a disservice to our youth, the very same youth that we're intended to serve. So.
No, I agree with you, Councilwoman. Nothing more demoralizing for a young person than to not get his check on time.
Right.
And so.
You put in the hours and then you don't get your check. Right. It's kind of like, what are we doing? So, okay. I'd really like to identify how we could actually create, whether it is a cooperative agreement with the county or whatever our sources of revenue is. There should be a singular way to expedite and consistently get these youth the checks that they've earned. And I'd like to see a proposal coming back to us on that, because I've heard too many. I've just heard too many different stories, and from YPI to to other agencies that were contracted to provide this service, and just needs to be solved.
Yeah, we should tighten that up. But even one story, I think, is enough to highlight the fact that we need to have a system that's working. more effectively. So,
Okay, thank you.
good. Okay, well, we will approve the CAO's report if there are some objections with the provision of focusing greater attention on making sure that these checks get out on time to the youth that are involved. But without any objection, that will be the recommendation. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, what else is before us at this time?
Nothing else, Mr. Chair.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Comment was satisfied earlier.